So this morning I was playing with titanium, and I'm practicing with these alternative materials, niobium, titanium, and aluminum, because it extends the range of things that you can do with techniques. And the titanium and niobium especially are so unique. They're such lightweight materials that you can make earrings that really are feather light, even though they can be substantial. So what I'll do today is run through quickly the process I used for making these in an impression die. A quick note, at several places you'll note that in this video, these techniques require that you use not just the sharp things that we're used to, but caustic solutions, electricity, and things that can harm you. So if you try to do this yourself, please be sure that you follow all directions, and your best bet sometimes is to, if you're not comfortable with these materials, is to simply take a class or to order pre-packaged things to do it from people that know how to do this. I built all this stuff myself mostly just because I have a substantial comfort level with these things, but that's just me, and I want to be sure that you are aware that I make it look pretty easy, and it is, but there are a couple steps where you could send things badly and get shocked, for example. Okay, so with that, let's make some earrings. The die I want to use is about 32 millimeters in diameter. Well, actually, it's about 30. So I'm going to give myself a little extra on this and make it like 35. That's a little wasteful of material, but not terribly so. And I'm just going to eyeball the straight line. Okay, and then let's see if I made that 35, 30, 35, and 35. Yeah, it's 75. We'll just cut it in half. And we're going to make these out of 26 gauge titanium sheet. So it turns out that when it's thin like this, it can be cut. I like cutting it with a saw, but you can just use some nippers here, some shears, and again, it creates a sharp edge, so you got to be careful with that. There. So that's ample material. For demo, I'm doing overkill. One of the difficulties with using the titanium and niobium is that there's not much way to use scrap up. I try to make larger chunks of little scrap so that in the future I can make tiny elements out of it or something like that. Okay, so the next step is to press this into the die. Well, to get a nice impression on this, it's shallow, which is good, but it also can be a problem because with the titanium, you really want to get as good of an impression first go as possible. And notice I'm not trimming it. So what I'm going to do is start with urethane, and then I'll follow the urethane with some aluminum pushers. They're just aluminum that can deform into the design. So let's start by lining up a piece of urethane on top of the design, center our work, and we'll press it. So you can tell it's done something, right, but it's uneven. So we're going to turn it, press it again, turn it, press it again, and I might press these half a dozen times. Okay, it's getting there. I could use a small piece of urethane and go around this edge, but I think what I'll do for starters is we'll put a puck in there of aluminum, and let's see what we can do with that. That's probably going to be pretty good. So that I'll do the next step, which is before I remove this, I'm going to put my name on the back of this piece. Alrighty, so what I do is I line this up and just decide where I'm going to put my name. And then when I cut it later, I'll try to orient it so that my name is right side up. Try to center this. Yeah, that's okay. Did okay. So we'll do the next one. Let's see what this one looks like. That's pretty good. I probably could have done just a little better, but around the edges. But that's actually pretty nice for titanium. Well, my next step is to simply decide on the orientation and mark where I want my earring hole. So there's my signature across there. So I'll want my hole up here somewhere, and I just like to more or less just get it where you think it will be an attractive position for the design. Okay, got one there. And there's my signature. This one, my signature is stamped a little better. Okay, and I will put it right there. Okay, okay. Now I'll drill some holes, and then I'm going to trim before I clean this up and get it ready for anodizing. Okay, all I do is use a regular steel bit. That pops through pretty easily. This thinner titanium is not particularly hard to work with. Notice my sweeps tray is well out of the way and covered. And after I'm done working with the titanium, just like with aluminum, I'll vacuum things up, make sure everything is pretty clean. The titanium and niobium will contaminate things, but since it has such a high melting temperature, it's more like if it got mixed in just a little bit with silver, it's more like a steel contamination. It's not going to dissolve into the metal. The aluminum, I think, is more problematic. I find I have to be much more careful with aluminum scraps and dust because the aluminum has such a low melting point that it'll contaminate silver, I think, just almost as badly as pewter or lead. So you want to be very careful when you're working with these alternative materials. Well, I wasn't paying attention and my battery died while I was trimming. So after I drilled the holes and got them set, all I did was use a pair of nippers and cut as closely as possible to the circular edge, leaving a tab. I like to leave a tab if I'm able to, because that makes a lot easier to grab this with a clip and immerse carefully in the electrolyte for anodizing. So our next step is going to be to clean these up pretty well and prepare them for the application of voltage, which will hopefully deposit a controlled layers of titanium oxide and give us the refractive colors. So we'll make a plan for that. As you'll see, these require strategy, and there's some creativity that you can explore with this material that's pretty cool. Now, of course, to clean this, you can do everything from sanding to use soap and water. I've got simple green from the sanitator, so I'm going to find if I can put them in there. But I'm not going to leave them in there for a long time. In fact, I'm just going to use a toothbrush now and just kind of make sure that you have oils and grease and things off of them. At some point soon, I'll put gloves on too, but right now it's not necessary. I mean, you could put them through the shot tumbler or something like that, but frankly, I think that's pretty good. So I'll just leave those for a moment, and then we will kick them over, dry them off, and get them ready. Alrighty, so our setup here is I have some Wink, which is a rust remover. It's dilute hydrofluoric acid and other things. It's nasty stuff, so be careful with it. Follow the directions. This is just distilled water for rinsing right out of there. And then over here, what I have is a beaker, glass beaker that I've set up as an anodizing tank. It just has a piece of stainless steel as the cathode. I put a piece of nylon mesh in there so I don't accidentally short circuit the titanium piece there. Then I have a power supply that can go up to 120 volts. I have capped the voltage at about 1/4 of an amp. That's actually enormous overkill, but you can go less. And then I had to come up with a plan, and so I've done this sequence once practicing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to first treat the whole piece with 70 volts. After I put it in Wink, rinse it, give it 70 volts. That will give me a blue-violet across the entire surface. Then I'm going to sand it because this is a relatively nice flat design, and I'll sand the high spots. And the reason I do that is then I can go to a lower voltage, and if I go to 50 volts, I'll put a yellow-green, really nice pretty yellow-green on what are the high spots. And then after that, I will use a homemade stylus and just add a little center of very dark green at 90 volts. You can always go up, but you can't go back down, which is why here you either have to mask it or remove the oxide somehow, or you just plan the sequence of events. But this will sand pretty well. So that's what we're going to do for this one. Right, so to set this up, first I place the negative terminal on the stainless steel cathode. The anode is on the piece, hence the phrase anodization. And if doing it this way, you have to be careful. You do not want this steel part of the clip to dive into the solution. It'll just cause current drain and contaminate your solution. So it's not a disaster, but I'd rather not do it. So I leave as much as I can here, and then I'm just careful. So what I'll be doing is, let me turn this on now. I've set it again for 70 volts, 1/4 amp, and what we'll do is, as I anodize this, we'll watch the amperage and the wattage fall off, because as it builds a layer of titanium oxide, the titanium oxide is not a good conductor, and so when there's a heavy layer of it on here, at one given voltage, it'll have such a resistance that it will no longer pass current. And then you know that you've maxed out what you can do. Now, I'm going to first treat this with an etchant, this acid, and what that will do is improve the adhesion of the layer. I think I've read it primarily cleans off any grunge, any remaining oxides, so that you can have pure titanium metal available to be oxidized. And it might increase the surface area a little bit. Now, this Wink, even room temperature, is quite reactive with titanium. If you use niobium, it's not as reactive, but you still have to be careful. So what I discovered is I just dip it like one second. You just don't need hardly any at all. And then rinse it in water, okay? And just blot it dry. Okay, then in short order, you want to go into the anodization tank. You should see bubbles rising, and it will be changing color. And There we go. It's starting to build the layer at 70 volts. Let's see. That's not bad. It's not great. It could be a little better. Huh. But it's pretty good. You can see it's purple. I don't like the way that handled it in there. I think I'm going to wink this again for a little longer, and we will dissolve off that oxide, at least much of it. Yeah. And we're going to do this again. Okay, let's try this and see what happens again. Much, much better. I didn't have a sufficient wink treatment, and you can tell the difference. What a difference. So in this case, I needed to just apply a little more of the etchant to get that nice deep, it's a blue-purple. And when you dry these, they look spectacular. So let's do the other one. And then I'll take it over to the bench and we'll sand off the high spots. So again, we'll wink it, and this time I'll give this one a little more than a second. I'll give it 3 or 4 seconds, check it. Okay, that might be okay. So let's try this one now. It's getting there. I got low voltage color. There's a real pretty blue that's at low voltage. I'm going for the really nice eggplant blue-violet that you get at 70. It's getting there. Yeah, so that's pretty close. Let's see if I got a nice even treatment. Oh, yes. So that also looks very nice. So I think there you don't want to overdo the etching, and you don't want to underdo the etching. You don't need it very much if you're using low voltage, but these higher voltage colors evidently require a better etching. So next step is going to be, let's turn that off. Next step is going to be we'll rinse these, and I'm going to take them over and just use very fine sandpaper and sand the highlights, and then what we're going to do is etch it again and put it in 50 volts. So notice 50 is less than 70. So when I sand off the metal, the 50 will deposit a different oxide thickness on the exposed portions, and it will not remove or not affect the purpley blue because that's at a higher voltage. So that's actually kind of a handy thing. Okay, now there's all sorts of strategies you can use to get different colors and patterns. It's just super cool. You just have to be thoughtful about it and understand the relationship between voltage, current, and the resistive material, which is going to be the titanium. So what I'm going to do now, this is the purpley that's been deposited with a reasonably high voltage of 70 volts. And I'm going to now scratch it off the high spots. And it takes a bit because it's a very tough coating, but you know, it can be scratched away. And like any patina too, this is why anodized rings can lose their brilliance over time, because they get a lot of friction and a lot of wear. Earrings and pendants, not so much. So what we'll do is we'll try to get enough high points to give us a really pretty contrast. I'm going to use a lighter color here by using 50 volts on my my power supply. It should give me a really pretty sort of yellow, almost green light green yellow color. And, you know, against purpley blue, that's always kind of attractive. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. You know, you can do a little more on this, but frankly, you know, why bother? You don't want to go too far, because if you start removing the color from the recesses, yeah, that'll ruin it for you. So because you want this blue purple to remain dominant in all the recessed areas. Okay, almost. Now when I etch these, again, we're going to be using a lower voltage, so I know it's not as critical, but I will try to be careful. I don't want to etch too long, because I do not want to remove the darker blue-purple oxide. That said, next step is simply to, again, I'll wash these in the sonicator like before, rinse them, give them a quick dip in the etchant, rinse it, and then we'll put it at 50 volts and try to deposit a yellow-green on the pattern. Well, let's see. We'll turn this down to 50 volts. It is currently on, so we better be a little careful here, John. I will put that there. I think I'm going to try it without winking and see if it'll work, because I don't want to remove that pre-applied oxide. So let's see if it'll go up to 50. Indeed, it seems to be working reasonably well. Yeah, it's quite attractive. It's a light green. In some incident light, it will be more yellow, but it's really, really quite attractive. Okay, so I'll just rinse that. There you go. And now we'll do the other one. Oops. Make sure that's got a pretty good connection. Okay, 50 volts. That one's nice. That one worked very well. Okay, that's not atypical. There's a bit of an asymmetry in these, so I don't know how well that can be seen right now on camera, but that's a beautiful yellow-green, very light green. So what I'm going to do next is, I could leave them there, but I'm going to get a little fancy, and I'm going to use a homemade stylus now and put a higher voltage right in that center part, hopefully to wind up being more like a dark green, between 85 and 95, so I'll go 90. And it'll heat up quite a bit, so I don't want to do a big area. I just want to add a dollop of the 90 volts right there in the middle as a contrast. Okay, now you can purchase things like this, and I recommend, unless you're very comfortable with voltage, current, and that kind of thing, that you look into purchasing it. That said, all I did was use a fiber tip and clamp it in a piece of silver tubing, into which can be inserted a couple drops of the TSP electrolyte. I'll just wet the tip in the electrolyte. Then I attach the negative pole to that, and then with the positive pole, the anode, on my piece, I will apply a small amount of current at 50. Well, no, I'm going to go. Let's go up to 90. We're going to go up to 90 volts, and now we should be able to overwrite, if you will, the 70 volt blue purple. So that's what we're trying to do right here in the middle. Yep, that's working really quite well. So, whoops, no, it's not. There we go. Let's try this. It was working. There we go. Very quickly, that worked. Okay, so let's do it on this one. It's hardly drawing any current at all. It's such a small area. Oh, that's pretty. That's a see that center now is more of a teal turquoise green. So those are pretty. Okay, so all that remains is for us to use the jeweler's saw, trim up this top part. I'll use a file to file them and make them smooth, and we'll add a set of niobium ear wires and call it good. You generally don't want to coat these with wax or a clear coat. It's tough as it is. I mean, it'll scratch eventually no matter what, but if you don't scratch them, it's permanent. That oxide layer is extremely thin, but extremely tough. And so as long as you don't scratch them around, it'll last a long time, if not forever. And so what we'll do is we'll just finish these off. Oh, that is pretty. When I look at those colors, the dark green, the light yellow green, and the blue purple. Yeah, so hopefully when I get close-up photographs of these, it will be a little easier to see than it is right at the moment. So I found that this material, being thin at least, is not that difficult to saw at all. In fact, it saws about like hard silver, I think, and it will dull your blades faster. And so I use my handy-dandy beeswax on the blade. This is a 5.0 nano blade. I'm not going to clamp this in my clamp because I just need to have this very sturdy and stable. And there'll be a little bit of wobble in it if I clamp it. So I try to get as close as I can with the saw. Inevitably, there will be a little bit of filing that needs to happen. But for 26 gauge material, a 5/0 blade will work. A 6 might be a little smoother. So notice it cuts reasonably well. I'm going to give myself a little loop for the ear wire. Beautiful. That's all there is to it. And so now I'll do the other one. And then we'll file it up some. Very nice. Okay, next step is to touch these up with a file. Okay, keep in mind that when you're working with different metals, you should be a little careful about contamination. So when I saw or file the titanium or niobium and aluminum, my sweeps tray is protected, and I'll be blowing off and sort of cleaning up this area and cleaning my files after I'm done. The nice thing about the titanium and niobium, though, is since it has such a high melting temperature, if it contaminates, it'll be a little more like if you get contamination with a saw blade or something like that. It won't actually dissolve into your silver and cause you that kind of trouble. Now, aluminum, on the other hand, is a lot more like contamination by pewter or lead, and I have to really work on being much more careful with aluminum. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now I'll just run this across the back a little bit, take off some of that sharp edge, and then I'll just quickly make sure that there's a burr that I'm getting off. Okay, very nice. Okay, let's do the next one. about this thin material is if you leave a sharp edge on there, it becomes more like a razor or a knife edge because it is thin. So you want to make sure you don't catch as you put your finger on there. You don't want it to be slicing. Wow, that is pretty. I like that. Okay, so now we'll add some niobium ear wires and take some photographs. I doubt seriously that anyone really needs me to show them how to add ear wires. But I'm putting it in anyway just because to complete the process. So I made a pair as a prototype, and I have those with regular, just plain niobium ear wires. And then this pair, just to distinguish them, I'm using these niobium ear wires that have a nice, really attractive little copper bead on them. It adds a bit of flash that's really quite pretty. Okay, and there you have it. We're done with them. Let's take some photos.